Camden is a city located in southern New Jersey, which sits across from the city of Philadelphia. In the 1700s, Camden was settled on by Quakers of European descent who exposed the indigenous people to alcohol and deadly diseases. In 50 years upon Quaker settlement, the indigenous population here would be nearly eviscerated. In 1844, Camden incorporated into Camden County. It became known for its industrial and manufacturing prominence as companies like Campbell's Soup, New York Ship, and RCA Victor were stationed here. Between 1870 and 1920, Camden gained 96,000 new inhabitants, making a population total of 116,000 people. Many inhabitants were attracted to the new opportunities for work in Camden. In this time, the ethnic makeup of the city began to switch from German, British, and Irish inhabitants to mainly Italian and Eastern European inhabitants. By the 1950s, workers at Camden's major companies began to unionize. For RCA Victor and Campbell's Soup, it was in their best interest to avoid increasing their labor costs to appease unions. They began to decentralize operations in Camden. Camden began to face white flight in this period. The white population would fall from about 61,000 to 26,000. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, as of 2022, Camden's population has dropped to 70,996 inhabitants, of which 42.9% are Black or African American alone, 53.3% are Hispanic or Latino, and 9.9% are white alone.
So, what is your name, age, occupation, and racial group you identify with?
So my name is Imani Cooper. I'm 23. I'm an accountant, and I identify as Black. I lived in Camden up until I graduated high school, which was back in 2019.
Mitchell Morgan, 53. I'm Black, and that's Afro-American. I speak an American citizen about 3-4 years ago, but I'm Black. I'm a Black man from the Caribbean island.
Yeah.
I came to Camden in 1984. Yeah, I've been here since 1984. I went to Woodrow Wilson High School, graduated in 89. Went to Drux University, graduated in 92. And I've been here since then. I live in Philadelphia now, but I grew up in Camden and I travel back and forth to Camden every weekend. Occupation, I was a banker, a bank manager for 25 years. And then I got sick, and now I work here at the church voluntarily as youth minister and outreach coordinator.
I am Kenny. I am a Rowan alumni with a degree in community and environmental planning, and I also got a minor in sustainable built environments. I am from the Dominican Republic, and I am a Camden resident. I've lived in Camden for about 17 years combined. First, I was born here. But I left at around 9 years old. I lived a year in Dominican Republic. And then I moved to New York, to the Bronx for 5 years. And then I came back to finish high school and do college here in New Jersey.
How do you feel about the city of Camden?
I think that when you are in Camden and you really get to experience what it has to offer is when you'll get to see the good things, but most people don't get to get that experience.
People in Camden don't really have a chance to exist as far as like moving forward. Once you're in Camden, you could stay in Camden, but I think that's wrong. I grew up in Camden, I went to college, had a good job. You know, I like the city of Camden. I think it's moving forward. You know, don't get me wrong, we had our good days, we had our bad days, like our city too. But I enjoy living in Camden, and I don't think Camden is as bad as people think they are.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it has gone through decline based on the history of Camden. But personally, I believe that there is room for opportunity if the right people work to develop the city into what it was before.
Primarily, there are Black and Hispanics, at least, from my experience. There's definitely a culture in Camden that every individual partakes in simply because they live in Camden. And then because of the different like ethnic groups, as far as like, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, African Americans, they all have their own subculture.
Going around Camden, I can tell it's a really diverse city. Not just because obviously there's different types of people, but because I feel like Camden is divided into communities, and it's very separated and divided. Let's say like around where I live, Creamer Hill, there is a lot of Hispanics. But then if you walk 10 blocks, you see a lot of Black people.
And I see people struggling to do better, want to do better, don't have the resources to do better. They need the proper resources to do better. And Camden is a city that people forget or want to forget about.
What it was not supposed to be. Camden was supposed to be a place of opportunity, a place of jobs. It's right off the bridge from Philadelphia, which is a big industrial city. So it was a very successful city, but then when it lost 2/3 of the jobs because of all these industrial sites were gone, the city just went downhill from there, and there was nobody to hold it, help it in a way. The reason why Camden grew was because of jobs, opportunity. Where is that now?
When you walk around Camden, what do you see? So like the scenery of Camden.
You see a lot of townhomes. I think that's what you'll see the most. Is knit communities. It doesn't really have that suburban feel. Everybody parks on the street, except for like the outskirts near North Camden and Pennsauken. But yeah, you'll see like close-knit homes, a corner store on every block, a lot of different like local restaurants on the strip. And there's a park in just about every community.
So my name is Isaiah Carr. I'm 22 years old. Currently work at Foot Locker, and evidently I'm Black. I was born and raised in Camden. None of my relatives that I can think of have issues like housing insecurity, knock on wood.
So my housing situation has changed. First I lived in the Dudley neighborhood area, which is a lot of row homes. But now I live in much more like multi-family homes, which are separate. They have their own backyard. And my family, most of my family migrated from Camden. For the obvious reasons, criminal activity, it's much more safer somewhere else. They want their kids to go somewhere else.
There really aren't many homes in Camden where you'll have a home on a plot of its own land and enough not parking space to accommodate family members. Many people live in like subsidized housing. You'll see that a lot too in Camden. Okay. It's like older brick homes that haven't really been taken care of.
I feel like a lot of that affects a lot of people living in Camden. Everybody has the mindset of leaving because of the housing situation.
As mentioned before, the rise in new commerce in areas just outside of Camden began to decentralize Camden's industry. In the 1960s, Cherry Hill homes rose in value due to new attractions like the Cherry Hill Mall. This explains what we see today. From 2018 to 2022, the median value of a Camden house was $95,700. The median value of Camden gross rent was $1,091. Comparatively, the median value of a Cherry Hill house was $329,200, and the median value of a Cherry Hill gross rent was $1,726. How would you compare houses in Camden to the houses in Cherry Hill, if you're familiar?
Well, I guess the most glaring difference would be the fact that you don't have anywhere near as many row homes or blocks like that in Cherry Hill, of course, because Cherry Hill is more suburban and also more upscale. You likely have more amenities and resources at your disposal than your Camden counterparts.
The houses in Camden are basically renters. The one in Cherry Hill are basically owned.
Cherry Hill for us is like an escape. As soon as you cross to the Cherry Hill neighborhood area, you can see how the houses are like. It might not be mansions, but it's obviously not middle class housing. They have better property, is maintained in a better way. The city looks way different because the government cares about the city. Compared to Camden, Camden is very dirty, very not maintained.
Houses in Camden are crowded, and houses in Cherry Hill you'll find aren't. You'll find a lot of like the suburban, American Dream type style homes where everyone has their own plot of land, or at least enough space between them and their neighbors. There are some communities where they have like townhomes and stuff, but those people have the luxury of like having a garage and all that, whereas you won't see that in Camden.
Okay.
What I've seen is predominantly white and like Asian, really like Indian American.
A 16-year-old, you're 16, what do you want to do? He said, I wanted to see 18. Shocking to me. He said, everybody he knows either died at 18 or in jail at 18. Now to hear a 16-year-old tell me that, why is that? Because there's nothing in Camden. There's no movie theaters, there's no mall, there's anything else you need to do, you have to go out of Camden. And then I took them to Mount Laurel. They were shocked to go to Mount Laurel. Because they live in Camden and they go to Cherry Hill. That's all they know. They've never been outside of Camden. And then in the program, I took all the counselors them to Bay for a trip. That thought I was in New York. No, I was in Jersey still, but because I've never been out of Camden, they never seen this stuff. So I'm trying to teach or encourage young kids to get out of Camden. And then you don't have to move out, but visit other places, get to know other places, and explore, learn.
They don't feel like where I lived in Dudley, I didn't feel safe to go outside because there's a lot of gang activity. It's dirty. It's already a city that is in poverty. Like if here in Camden, you see a person sleeping on the floor, it's normal. And obviously, you try to help as much as possible. But if that person was in Cherry Hill or any city that's progressing, it would cause that disturbance, and people will say something. Here, we're used to that. That's why people come here.
And I call them guests. I don't call them homeless. I call them guests because everybody, when we started this program, we didn't want it to be like a soup kitchen, which you line for food on the plates. I hated that. I want people to come and sit at the table, and we treat them like people. They get waited on hands and feet. We serve them breakfast. We speak to them, we laugh and joke with them, have come to interact with them.
I'm not going to say that Camden has a uniquely bad homelessness problem, but it's still a very obvious one. It's definitely an elephant in the room.
There used to be a place in Camden called Tent City, and it was there since I was in elementary school. So long story short, Tent City was an area right before downtown in Camden. It's like near one of the exits on the highway that you can take to go to Cherry Hill. There was a community of homeless people who lived in tents near a bridge, essentially. This big thing back in high school, they had the local trash people like come and collect all their tents and throw it away. Wow. And all those people there had to relocate. So I feel like, it definitely does exist, but the way in which they handle it is not the best.
Okay.
In America, Black and Brown communities have historically been forced to live in less desirable places as patterns of segregation continue. Redlining, discriminatory federal housing loans, and predatory subprime lending has contributed to the lack of home ownership and prevalence of public housing programs in some Black and Brown communities. Public and affordable housing has notably been excluded by wealthier communities. Exclusionary zoning policies have pushed public housing buildings to locate closer to industrial and Superfund sites. Discrimination in land use policy has concentrated environmental injustices in politically disempowered areas, and disinvestment has contributed to the lack of environmental maintenance in these communities. Camden is no stranger to these issues.
If you look at all that, you can see again why Camden is considered the EJ community, because it's definitely overburdened with the brownfields, with the water quality, with the health disparities and heart attacks, asthma,
There are environmental challenges because Camden is historically, being a river town like many river towns in the U.S., they're plagued with industry, but that's a blessing and a curse because that brings the wealth to the city. And those industries were pollutants. So we do have challenges with the groundwater as a result, because although the industry is gone, they left behind some challenges. And so in order for us to even improve this land we were talking about, we often have to clean it to a standard that we can in good conscience put a person there to live happily ever after. In addition, air quality, because we had some industries that polluted the air. And so there were residents that lived directly next door to some areas where their quality of life was poorly impacted.
The first one that comes to mind was back in 2016 when there was issues with the water. So I remember we had to, I think we had to boil the water before using it one time. I can remember this happening 2 different times in 2016.
The biggest, in my area, the biggest environmental concern is flooding, because when there's a lot of rain here, there's nowhere to go. Literally, there's nowhere to go. I believe it was like a year ago. There was a big rainstorm, and all of Kramer Hill was flooded. We literally had to drive over the park, like the park basketball courts, to get to where we were supposed to go because there was nowhere to go. Honestly, it's something that our neighborhood has brought up to the government a lot. They did try to create like this rainwater management system, like around the parks, which is the places that don't get flooded. But now that problem is caused on the parks as well, because all that water from all the streets are going there now. So you fix something but cause a problem somewhere else.
When I was growing up in schools in Camden, like I couldn't drink out of the water fountain. Like they had tape on it, and like they would bring in those little water fountain, the little water coolers, like with the jugs, and those were just all around the school. Camden has a lot of some type of thing, but I know they have like a couple Superfund sites now, but it's something that's not the greatest environmentally.
A Superfund site is any land in the United States that has been contaminated by hazardous waste and identified by the Environmental Protection Agency. Superfund sites are candidates for cleanup because they pose a risk to human health and the environment. There are currently 8 active Superfund sites in Camden County on the National Priorities List.
I know so many other people who have asthma. So I do believe we're a product of our environment, and it was definitely the air quality, because I graduated from Camden High School in 1995. So my entire elementary was in the city of Camden, and junior high school was also in the city of Camden.
So with that, and a lot of that is directly linked to the air pollution industries that are within like almost a 2-mile proximity in certain areas, but air travels. And again, by us being close to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, some of that is coming from that. We have fumigations company in Gloucester City.
I forgot what that building is along the highway near Kane Avenue. That pink building, I think it's like a destruction plant.
It's an incineration plant.
Okay. Like, for example, I'm not sure if that's necessarily good for the environment. Certain areas, if you walk through certain roads, it just smells like, I guess, sewage. I'm not really sure how to describe that smell, but certain roadways and highways throughout the city, you can also smell some pretty nasty things, and I think that comes from a lack of care around making sure infrastructure is sound, making sure that it's sanitary and hygienic.
So the air quality and environment is definitely an issue and concern. And that's one of the reasons why, I'm still involved, because those are the things that that we know that needs to be addressed.
In your opinion, does race have something to do with Camden's environmental issues?
I think it does.
I'm learning that it may. I didn't think so at first, but as I understand more about how resources are dispersed and targeted, I think it may.
That it's like a coincidence that most places that like are environmentally hazardous also are inhabited by lots of people of color. Black people didn't have the same privilege as white people to be able to leave those communities when things started to go downhill. And now it's like just a concentration of like a lot of vacancy, because now like all those industries kind of like closed or moved their headquarters, and just like a lot of other factors.
I've read and watched stuff about how they tend to place things that would be potentially hazardous into the most, vulnerable populations throughout the country, not just in Camden.
Camden is a population that we can scream out what's going on, but we will never leave the place because we have to be here, because it's affordable to be here and we can't go somewhere else. So because the government believes that we're not going to go anywhere, I don't feel like they address these problems. But if it was any type of, like, let's say white people tend to go and critique, and it can cause a big problem. I believe if it was white people, it would be a totally different city, completely.
Like there are now like organizations in the city who are committed to like Camden's environmental transformation, such as like Camden Community Partnership. They host an environmental summit every year, like specifically a Camden Environmental Summit every year. Center for Environmental Transformation and Waterfront South, or like South Camden. So there's definitely like organizations and people committed to like changing that narrative kind of like in the city.
We have set a lot of standards in terms of tree planting. Over the last 15 years, we had a goal of planting 1 million trees. We are a SHEAG tree city, and we have community gardens. We've introduced rain gardens and pocket parks wherever we can. So we know that naturally we are improving the city's carbon footprint, but it's almost like 2 decades too late. So I do believe myself and others like me are suffering from known and unknown chronic illnesses as a result of the environment.
Like to just show an example of the change. So when I grew up in like South Camden, when I was with my grandma, there was this park. And growing up, like I will always be scared to walk back there because like you could hear the noise of one of these factories. And also the park wasn't like that renovated, honestly, but now it's got a complete revamp. So that just shows like the city's commitment to kind of like there has been green space, but it's like, how can we revamp it and make it better, just so it can be utilized?
This is a
During the construction of Rutgers Camden in 1926, Camden residents were pushed out of their homes and their small businesses diminished. The Camden campus of Rutgers University showcases a prominent presence in the educational and health services job sectors. The majority of job positions spanning various industries are filled by individuals commuting into the city.
How do you feel about Rutgers students?
Oh, yeah. I would say majority of Rutgers students are not from Camden. Many of them don't know of the area or care to know. And I feel that Rutgers really needs to do more in improving Camden as a whole, because when you talk about universities building space in underprivileged communities, it really can uplift the community. When you're talking about real estate, educational access. So I feel that Rutgers really needs to step up when it comes to those things.
Right.
Well, see, here's the thing with Rutgers. Rutgers has the opportunity to do better, I think. They have the resources, they have the money.
I am a doctoral candidate in public affairs and community development here at Rutgers Camden. When I walk around the city nowadays, mostly what I see is the campus and downtown, because that's where my work keeps me. But historically, I've spent a lot of time in South Camden, in Bergen Square, in North Camden, and what I see are communities. Communities that, despite the best efforts of capitalists and local and state government, are figuring out their own way of thriving in the midst of a radically shifting economic landscape. So for me, the story of displacement in the city of Camden starts when my grandparents moved out, a little bit after World War II. My grandfather owned a butcher shop and grocery store in South Camden. Right around the time New York Shipbuilding closed post-World War II, we didn't need as many warships, thank God. And all of a sudden you had this huge mass of people who had lost their source of employment, right? Where as jobs kept moving out of the city, those who could chose to follow them, moved to the surrounding suburbs, and that's how my grandparents went from South Camden to Pennsauken, right? That's where the Foxes, the people who originally built the Chancellor's office building, they moved to Haddonfield. The city's reality, and that there was an increase in violent crime, there was an increase in sex work, in drug dealing, right? But the question is why, right? And frankly, I'm of the persuasion that it concentrated in this area because all the people with power and privilege in the surrounding communities had enough resources to say, not in my backyard. And so when we think about the history of displacement, I think it's a little bit more complex than what forces people out, right? Because first, white flight's real. People ran away due to the post-industrial decline. But then I think when you couple that with a country that's built on systemic institutional racism, a narrative starts to emerge, because now you've taken what was once a diverse community, you've got largely people of color living in the city, and white people living in the surrounding suburbs. All of a sudden it becomes those people and their problems, and I think that's a disingenuous narrative.
How has Rutgers contributed to the lives of displaced people?
So, literally got asked this question in a class today, and I struggled with my answer there. I struggle to speak to this because from like an institutional perspective, it's not like we've made an articulated commitment to ending chronic homelessness or build mixed income housing, right? Because we're a university, that's not our role. I would say that I'm proud of the fact that we haven't contributed to the gentrification of the city in the way that many other urban universities have. Most students are commuters, right? Or they live in our residence halls, so there hasn't been that redevelopment of housing to appeal to college-age students. I worry that it's happening in spaces in North Camden right now, but I don't think that's the market demand. Where I would say I really feel that Rutgers makes a contribution is, first, in living out our civic engagement mission and trying to get students actively involved in the community as part of their undergraduate experience, and particularly in working with individuals experiencing socioeconomic vulnerability. You know, I think a great example is a few years ago, we had an undergraduate student who was incredibly passionate about working with unhoused persons, right? They worked at Joseph's House, the largest overnight shelter. They used all of their social capital on campus to pull together an entire event focused on raising awareness of issues related to the experience of homelessness and raising money for Joseph's House. They raised more than $7,000. And specifically, if you're coming to Rutgers Camden, make it a point to get off of our campus into the surrounding community, because there are a lot of hidden gems here.
Black African American, and my occupation is the owner of Nuance Cafe. I don't live in Camden, I just have business in Camden.
And what is
I love Rutgers students. They're the best students ever. No, well, most of my baristas have been Rutgers students. So it's either, a lot of them were typically masters or, you know, 1Ls, 2Ls, whatever. Those type of programs. We have had undergrads as baristas, but it's very transient. You know, they last 1 or 2 semesters and then it's like they're gone on to something else. I would love to get more students in here. In terms of my clientele, it's a mix of the university, folks that work in the city along the waterfront, city employees, and residents. So it's just a good blend of folks, and I think it's a community spot where folks can come in, feel comfortable, get a great cup of coffee, tea, wonderful baked goods. That's my pitch. The folks along the waterfront don't necessarily engage with the community as much as they could. And, you know, the college is mostly a commuter campus, so it's a lot of transient folks that come through the city. But you got to come off campus and embrace and see the beauty of the neighborhood and the people that live here. And just keep an open mind and not fly in the morning and fly out at night. You're not coming off what they call that invisible line of fence along the waterfront or some of the other areas, but to really, you know, engage. I think the direction they're going in terms of waterfront development was a great idea. I think the city needed it. I would say the only challenge, or one of the many challenges, is that connection and becoming a sense of community between waterfront, some of the larger organizations, the micro businesses, and the residents themselves.
People need to support issues and events like this that are advocating for them. Like, we have to advocate for ourselves before expecting somebody else to advocate for us.
Congressional representative, and you also have a senator for this district. It has to go to them.
There needs to be two-way communication to connect the dots. So much money comes from the federal government, comes from the state government, comes through the county. So those dots need to be connected. It's not always city council and the mayor. You know, funds comes from other places as well. And residents need to know and understand that. So sometimes folks are fussing at city council, they're fussing at city hall, and it's the county, it's the state. Right. So all partners need to be connected. You know, we need to know, residents need to know where the money's coming from.
We're here, see us, see what the situation is, and talk to us, not at us. Be part of a partnership and a collaboration to make the difference. You know, we have, what, about 30 plus people here, or 30 something people here. Why isn't someone from City Hall or the news folks here? You know, the TV stations that are very quick to come into the city when there's something wrong. But when we talk about what is and what the possibilities are, and the fact that the folks here are here because they care about the city, they want to make a difference, let's work together.
And how do you feel about the city of Camden?
I've always had a lot of passion for Camden, especially because even at such a young age, my parents always instilled me to have a sense of pride in where I'm from. And because of that, I think it's important to always do what I can to positively impact the city.
It's rich in history and surrounded by water. And on the other side of Philadelphia, and where I was raised and where I live.
Camden had mostly good people here who wants to do better, who look forward to doing better with the proper resources. Don't be afraid, we're not evil.
When you look at how social services are distributed across the county, even though need exists all over the county, social services are largely concentrated in the city. And so if you want to receive assistance, particularly if you're unhoused, there's no place to go but Camden.
So if you set up the city to be that hub of those type of programs, you're bringing that into the city. It's not necessarily that these are the people that are of the city. And again, it's a whole perception of trying to move away from what we think we see versus what the real reality is.
And so I really would say that the experience of homelessness in southern New Jersey is a southern New Jersey issue that we make a Camden problem by inflicting it on the city.
Camden residents can do, because it really falls back onto the people of Camden, is educate themselves, understand the importance, learn why it's important to be involved, because you'll have people complain and to have small talks about it, but no one's really taking it into action. And I think a little bit of that is people not understanding the gravity of the situation at hand. So I think educating, and then in turn standing up for your rights as a Camden resident.
A lot of times you go somewhere and it's worse than where you came from or where you left. And if you are involved, why not change the situation? Why not advocate for change?
When you walk around Camden, what do you see?
I see possibilities. I see possibilities. I see a really good opportunity for city, county, state to find a way to give back to community that stood up the city when nobody else would.
There's still strides that could be made, but when we look back to where we were 10 years ago when this conversation started, I see where Camden is becoming cleaner, and we have set standards in terms of sustainability, but I think every day we all can learn something new, and we still have ways to go.
Like if you go up to North Camden, you go to some of the gardens that Neighborhood Collaborative Community Garden stewards, one of the most beautiful places in South Jersey you're going to encounter, right? You go down to Waterfront South where the Center for Environmental Transformation is, and some of the spaces that they maintain are absolutely gorgeous. We've got parks all over the place, right? But that's not the narrative that we like to paint about the city. Like, we focus.
Here you go to lots of neighborhoods where people take care of their homes and their lawns, and the houses are painted.
There's certain areas walk to Camden, and the neighbors will get together, and everybody clean the street and everything, clean anything.
And this is what I love about this city. Like, you see people stepping up and saying, my community can do better. I can do better.
You have an awful lot of entrepreneurs, black and brown folks in the city that have been here, that are creatives and writers and marketing and branding and all of those other things that is easy pickings in terms of how to uplift a community for sustainability where it continues to look like the folks that live here.
My friend Jackie, who runs Neighborhood Collaborative Community Gardens. This is just like one woman who didn't like how ugly the abandoned vacant lots on her street looked. So she started gardening in them. And now there's this whole nonprofit organization that is teaching other people how to do the same, teaching Camden youth about stewarding property and creating employment opportunities for them along the way.
I think something that I love about the city is the culture. Growing up in like the Parkside neighborhood of Camden, every summer I would hear, well, literally like the Camden High marching band would like march adjacent to my street, where there is this group, because they still exist, called the Camden Sophisticated Sisters, and it's kind of like this Camden resident. She made like a drill team, so they will also just like march through my neighborhood, and it was just like super fun.
A lot of people do make a name for themselves, even with, growing up in Camden. And there are still people who reside in Camden after having been very successful in what they do.
I would say instead of focusing on people coming in, I would focus on people that already are here. Offering, like I said at the beginning, offering job opportunities for the people that live here.
But it's about, the neighborhood, it's about the community, and it's about building some kind of cohesiveness when people can just feel like, we're in it together. We're neighbors. We are our brother's keepers.
It is generally a good place. Like, you'll come across people who are loving, hardworking, and you can really make connections with those and have friends that last a lifetime. I mean, all the friends that I have and still talk to are from Camden. And I've made friends from various cities, but the ones in Camden I always stay in touch with.
I think with Camden, I hope it can become a much more prosperous, cosmopolitan, egalitarian city. I hope that people who live here don't feel like they have to leave just to have opportunity, and that they'll be able to spend their lives here, be able to work in the city, live in the city, have fulfilling careers, be able to raise their children here, send their children off to school here, and just have opportunities, because I feel like there are so many people in the city that deserve it just as much as anyone.
And last question, how would you describe Camden in one word?
I would say unfortunate. It's a city that was very successful, and because it got bad luck, it just went completely downhill and nobody was there to help it. And because of that, it's what it is now, and I feel like it's too late to go backwards and try to fix the situation. So yeah, I would say very, very unfortunate.
How would I describe Camden in one word? Possibilities. It's possible. But it's possible, and it can happen when we do it together.
Faith.
Okay.
Faith. That's it. Faith.
The one word to describe Camden is a jewel. Camden is a jewel.
First one that came to mind is resilient.
I'm struggling between two, and so you're getting both. Resilient, creative.
I was going to be corny and say invincible because of our city's motto, but I think a better word would be resilient.
I would say resilient.